Hey guys, there have been a couple of developments over the last few days in Japan in relation to the Olympics and COVID. So just a few little updates for you. The first one is, and you might have heard it already, you might have heard it on the news in your own countries, that the Ugandan Olympic team arrived in Japan and were tested for COVID, as everybody who arrives in Japan is tested for COVID at the moment. And one of the team members tested positive. So no huge surprises there. We are in the middle of a pandemic after all. So we've got a few more things going on as well. There's been a state of emergency that we will here to refer to as the state of panic, because that's what we call it in our house. So there's been a state of panic going on here, on and off for the last 18 months. And we talked about that in the previous video, that there's this sort of a cycle of the state of panic is declared, everybody is careful because of the state of panic, and then they lift the state of panic, and then the number of people testing positive goes up again, so then they declare another state of panic, and the number of people testing positive goes down, and they declare another state of panic. And it's been on and off like that for the last 18 months. And the old guys who run the place are always a little bit behind the game, so they're always just a bit behind this curve. So the state of panic has been happening for the last 6 weeks or something in 12 prefectures. And today it was lifted in all the prefectures except Okinawa. So of course what we're going to see over the next week or two is the number of people testing positive is going to go up again, because only 9.6% of Japanese people have been fully vaccinated so far. So obviously they lift the state of panic, and as always when they lift the state of panic, everybody goes, great, let's go out. And so everybody goes out, hangs out with their friends, and then more people catch COVID, and then the numbers go up again, and they declare another state of panic. So obviously they don't want, with the Olympics starting soon, they don't want Japan to be in a state of panic when the Olympics start, of course, because that's sort of hard, isn't it? It's not going to look good, and it's hard for them to administer it, and it's all sort of very tricky. And at the same time, they've been talking about, maybe we should consider loosening up the rules in regards to groups of people hanging out together, right? Because of course they want as many spectators at the events as they can. So, oh geez, at the moment we've got all these sort of rules, not really rules, but guidelines that say you shouldn't have more than a certain number of people together. Oh geez, that's a bit tricky when you want to run an international event. Maybe we should consider changing that a bit. So it's just ridiculous. It's just this really ridiculous trying to control a pandemic, but at the same time they want to be able to have their Olympic Games and have lots of people hanging out together. So it's just a farce. It's just a farce. And look, as far as the Olympics is concerned, obviously the IOC, International Olympic Committee, that's their job, is to have Olympic Games. So they don't want to cancel, because their whole life is having Olympic Games, right? That's all they do. So they don't want to cancel, and the Japanese government doesn't want to cancel because they've invested all this money in infrastructure, and apparently IOC can actually sue them if they pull out without the IOC's agreement, because they actually have a contract. So the Japanese government obviously want it to happen. 80% of the Japanese people don't want it to happen. 80% of the Japanese people say they don't want it to happen this year. Some say they'd be happy for it to be delayed till next year. Some say they just want to cancel altogether. They're sick of hearing about it. But 80% of Japanese people don't want the Olympic Games to be starting next month. So, but the government do, IOC do, and probably the athletes do too, because they've been preparing for it, and if they've got to wait another 3 years, they might have passed their peak, and they might lessen their chances of winning anything. But you would have to ask, what value a 2020 Olympics, which they still call it the 2020 Olympics, even though it's happening, it may be happening in 2021. It makes you wonder what value a 2020 Olympics gold medal is going to have in the future, except for novelty value. Because if some competitors don't show up, and perhaps some countries, I mean, we haven't heard yet, but you know, perhaps some countries won't show up, and definitely some competitors, at least one Ugandan's not going to show up. And that's going to be the first. I mean, they've only started arriving recently, the athletes, so it's inevitable there's going to be more. So if not all athletes are competing, or not all countries are competing, what value does a gold medal have? And I'm sure any athletes watching this would have to agree, you know, that if those guys obviously want to compete with the best in the world, so when they win a gold medal, it has some value. But, you know, who knows if that Ugandan was the best in his sport? I don't know who he was or what his specialty was. But you know, if you know the guy that didn't turn up might be better than you, you'll never know, will you? So it makes you wonder what value those gold medals are going to have. But anyway, so yeah, today they've lifted the state of panic in all prefectures except Okinawa. Apparently Okinawa still has a big enough problem that they're not lifting the state of emergency there. But Okinawa is not really involved in the Olympics, so that's possibly another reason why they're not worried about that. They're really pouring a lot of effort into Tokyo and Osaka or anywhere that's going to be involved in the Olympics to try and vaccinate as many people as possible. They're sort of panicking to try and get it done quickly now in those places. The rest of us, they don't really care. It could be next year for the rest of us. So that's all happening there. And then, what else we got? Oh yeah, so here's the statistics as we stand today. 9.6% of people have been vaccinated, fully vaccinated so far, 9.6. I think the world average is 25% or something, isn't it? So we're really bad. I think I heard Japan is the lowest rate of vaccination in the G7 countries. Some terrible statistics like that. No doubt you'll be hearing about that because when the Olympics actually start, and the news stations around the world start reporting on it, of course COVID's going to come up, and Japan's, you know, very, very poor vaccination rate is going to come up for sure. So you're bound to be hearing about it on your own news networks. What else we got? Oh, so 127 million people in Japan. 774,000 have tested positive so far since it started. So 774,000 tested positive, 743,000 have been discharged, so they've been sent home. 21,000 cases are still active, and 14,360 people have died. Which again, as we always say, is, you know, if one person dies, it's a tragedy, but possibly compared to the rest of the world, it's not so bad as compared with what some countries have been like. But that's not because of the government, that's because of the people. That's because the Japanese people, as we reported, you know, when this thing first started, you know, the government said to the Japanese people, okay, please wear masks, please wash your hands, please don't touch each other, and please maintain social distancing. And all the Japanese people went, hi, and that's what they've been doing. So it's really the people. You know, there's a guy driving past in a car on his own wearing a mask, and we see that all the time. You know, couples, husband and wife with masks, driving along in the car with their masks on. So wearing masks comes naturally to Japanese people, as does washing hands, as does not touching each other, as does doing what you're told. So at no time during the last 18 months have they actually brought in any laws to tell people what to do. They haven't had to. They've just asked people, please do this, please don't do that, and that's pretty much what everybody's done. And because of that, probably we haven't done too badly compared to the way some other countries have done. People don't argue. Generally here, people don't argue about having to wear a mask or anything else. There's some people a bit hesitant to get vaccinations because they've read a lot of the nonsense that goes on the internet and on TV and stuff, but the majority are keen to get vaccinated. So again, we know some people think that the vaccination thing's a big conspiracy from somebody, and we know all that. That's fine. I was thinking recently, you know, if you're an old person like me, you've spent your life getting vaccinations. You know, when I was a kid, we had smallpox vaccinations, typhoid vaccinations when we travelled. You know, smallpox, typhoid, cholera. What else? I can't remember. Lots of vaccinations. It was a real common thing, going to the doctor and they put the thing on your skin and prick you with a needle, and you know, vaccinations were sort of a thing that we had all our lives. So, you know, it doesn't sort of freak us out. Tell you what freaks me out, I've seen some stories recently from people. One was in our house we watch a bit of UFC, you know, the Ultimate Fighting, and there was one of the fighters from UFC. Now those guys are peak, like they're warriors, right? and this guy's a super fit UFC fighter. Can't remember which one it was now, what his name was, but you'll find him on the net. But he super fit guy, and he got COVID, and I mean, you know, that guy's breathing and lungs and whole body would have been in peak condition, and he caught COVID, and it almost killed him, and he got all the complications. He got pneumonia, and he got all the other stuff that goes with it, you know. And I hear stories like that and think, geez, you know, if that happened to that young, healthy guy, you know, an old guy like me. And the other ones is the long-lasting effects. You know, I've heard a few first-hand reports recently from people who've had it and have got like permanent lung damage and all sorts of stuff like that. You know, to me, ignoring the dying thing for a moment, you know, to some of us, the risks from a vaccination seem way less than the risks from catching the disease, which is usually why you get a vaccination. That's why I got my smallpox vaccination when I was a kid. Anyway, won't get into all that. It's up to individuals what they decide. Again, we've decided in our house that we think it's fair that people have a choice, that if you don't want the vaccination, you shouldn't have to take it, and if you do want it, you should be able to have it. Yeah, and we should be able to have it soon. You know, we shouldn't have to wait so long, but it should be a matter of choice whether you have a vaccination or not. And it also should be a matter of choice if you have to listen to other people going about what a conspiracy it is as well. Now, everyone's welcome to their opinion, but you know, some of us sort of don't want to hear that anymore. Anyway, oh yeah, funny stories. Some of you might have seen on Patreon recently, we posted a picture from the local community centre, and it was all the old people, because what's been happening in this area is that they want the government send the people over 65 a card that says you're entitled to get vaccinated, so please contact this phone number, and or get online and have a look at this thing online. And so what's been happening is people sit there on the phone all day calling this phone number, and it's engaged. And one old guy told me he tried 1,000 times, he reckoned, during a week. He just kept hitting the redial button, and before he finally got through. So what they've realised is that a lot of the old people don't have access to the internet, and they don't have cars, and they, you know, they've got all sorts of problems trying to get organised to get vaccinated. So what the community centre was doing was inviting the old people to come to the community centre, and then they had people sitting there at tables with computers, and they were booking the vaccination for them. So how, you know, it's so typical Japanese, putting another layer into the thing. Instead of, what they should have done is had 2 nurses and a big box of vaccines, right? And when the old people turned up at the community centre, they should have vaccinated them, you know, which would be logical, wouldn't it? But instead of that, they had a whole thing set up, just like a vaccination centre, with social distancing and everybody waiting in long lines, sitting on seats waiting in line, to get to a computer to book their vaccination at another venue. So another day, they had to go to another venue to get their vaccination. How irrational is that? You know, we've been talking about it a little bit recently, about the irrational stuff. This COVID thing has definitely brought out the true colours of individual people, hasn't it? And I'm sure all of you guys know people who you've seen another side of them since COVID has come out, you know, to how they think and how they react and how they behave. And we've had lots of people around us that have behaved in pretty irrational ways, you know, individuals, and then organisations like the Japanese government. It's scary. It always seemed that during a crisis those guys reacted pretty well, but you know, they certainly haven't reacted well to this. You know, just way too slow. You know, there's actually people, the Tohoku disaster, how many years ago was that? Was that 10 years ago? And there are still people living in temporary accommodation from that disaster. That's how slow the Japanese government move. Anyway, enough about that. So yeah, going to the community centre to book to go to somewhere else to go get their vaccination, isn't that crazy? So probably the question we get asked a lot is what's happening with the Olympics. Another question we get asked, what's happening with COVID and the vaccinations. Another question we get asked from patrons and from other people that we communicate with is how's it affecting us? How's it affecting you, they say. How's it affecting you? Yeah, well, it's not good. Other than the fact that it's just frustrating and irritating and all this other stuff. As far as our work, our business is concerned, because we actually have a couple of jobs, you know, part-time jobs. One of the things that we do is sort of like a part-time job is our English Family Directory. and a lot of the listings on there are free, and so people can list their businesses on there for free. If they're genuinely English friendly, they can list their business on there for free. Doesn't cost them anything. If they want a full listing that allows them to put photos and videos and lots of stuff like that, they have to pay. It's 10,000 yen a year, so it's $100 bucks a year, which isn't too much. It's $2 a week. But it's good value for them, but it is one of our important sources of revenue. You know, we need that money from those people to pay our bills, you know. And of course, what's happened, you know, we've talked about this a lot over the last 12 months, is a lot of businesses in Japan, because of the government, every time they do the state of panic, they say, okay, we want restaurants and bars and everything to close, right? And that's killed some of them. So some of the English-friendly businesses that are on our directory have just been killed by the fact that they just couldn't open, and that their rent and everything else stayed the same, but their income dropped to zero, basically, for periods of time, or just dropped to really minimums, and they lost. And some of them gone broke, so they've disappeared off the directory altogether, and others are still struggling to keep going, but just couldn't afford to pay their $100 a year anymore. So what we've done for some of those guys is we've said, look, we'll keep you on the directory, and we'll continue to spread the word about your business. That you guys know that watch us for a while know that we're often talking about good ones, you know. If you haven't seen the We Can't Be Bought video, we made that recently. It's important when thinking about this, is because we still only recommend any of these guys that we genuinely believe in, you know. And so some of them that just don't have any money, you know, that a lot of them are tour operators, you know, they've just been screwed the last 18 months, you know, that rely on foreign tourists to Japan for their business, you know, tour operators or anybody in the hospitality industry, you know, the hotels and apartments, and anybody that's been relying on the tourism industry basically has been screwed. So some of those guys have been able to continue to pay their $100, and some of them haven't. So with most of the ones, the good ones that haven't been able to pay the $100, we've just given it to them for free, basically, for a year, which is good. It makes us feel good to be able to do that for them, because a lot of them are small family operated businesses like us. But the result of that has been that our income has plummeted dramatically. And then we have a part-time job that we do that's a real job, and that's plummeted dramatically too. So the answer to the question, how's it affected us? It's been really tough. It's been really, really tough. Probably one of the only things that's allowed us to pay our electricity bills and our food bills and all our bills has been our support that we've received from our patrons and through our PayPal supporters. So just got to mention this, because it's really essential for us. Is if you are on Patreon or PayPal and you're supporting us, thank you very much. And if you can step up your support at all, that'd be wonderful. If you're not supporting us already through Patreon and PayPal, and you can afford to, underneath every video there's a couple of links there for Patreon and PayPal. So please, if you can help us to continue what we're doing. Basically, this has shifted from being one of our minor part-time jobs to being our totally essential part-time job, basically, because this is something we can continue to do, even though the other things are affected by the state of panic and COVID and everything else. Making videos and taking photos and showing them to you guys is something that we've been able to continue to do. So it's become more important, and the support that we get from you guys has become more important. So we really, really, really want to continue to do this. You know, as I mentioned before, I'm quite happy to go get a job digging holes in the rice fields or working in a convenience store or something like that if I have to pay my bills and support my family. But I'd much, much prefer to keep making videos and taking photos and showing you guys, because, you know, we like doing that. You know, and we do, the whole family like doing that. You know, some of you guys might have heard me say before that, you know, sometimes driving around in the car like this with the family, and someone will say, oh look, that photo, quick photo or camera, or those birds, you know, we like taking the people on Patreon would have seen the photos already. Those cranes, those tall skinny birds that we see in the rice fields, we're always trying to get photos of those guys because they're really elusive, you know, they fly away really quickly. Things like that. Kura, you know, the old storehouses or any old interesting building or temple or shrine. You know, it's often me who goes, oh look, But sometimes it's one of the kids, or the other half, you know, the better half. She'll be looking out the other window and go, oh, look at that, you know, quick, get the camera, you know, look at that over there. So we love it, you know, we love doing it. But again, we couldn't afford to keep doing it and put the time into it that we do if it wasn't for the patrons and the PayPal supporters, because just the logistics of the time that it takes, you know. So anyway, enough of that. If you're not supporting us already, please do. And that's about it. That's about it. So yeah, look, it continues. This won't be the last time we make a video telling you that one of the athletes has come to Japan with COVID, right? We suspect it's going to happen a bit. The other thing we suspect is, obviously, because there's people coming from all over the world, they're going to be bringing in some of those variants that we don't want coming in as well. So we're going to hear someone's tested positive for COVID and it turns out it's one of the nasty variants. We're going to hear that, aren't we? You know, that's a frustrating thing about this. That's a stressful thing about this, is it's so obvious, isn't it? It's so obvious that's what's going to happen, you know, and it's inevitable. And it's just, and everyone's going to act surprised when it happens. That's what happens here all the time. You know, you can see something's going to happen, and they sort of, they don't see it coming, and then it comes, everyone goes, oh, yeah, Bickety star, you know, yeah, we're surprised. And they're like, well, why are you surprised? There's a pandemic on and you've invited the whole world to come and hang out in a small space, you know, why would you be surprised? So there's going to be no end of stories about this, right? And probably the opposite too. Probably some people will come here healthy and go home with COVID, right? Take it back to their own country as a souvenir. Anyway, so we're not complaining. Look, over the years, those of you who've been with us for 12 or 14 years, however long we've been doing this, all sorts of good and bad things happen, and we just tend to make the most of whatever's happening and adjust and just try to do our best with whatever's happening, you know. There's a couple of interesting things in Japanese thinking that are expressed in their language, and that's gambaru, which is do your best, and shogunai, which is it can't be helped, which we've got in English as well, but in Japanese hearts and minds it has much more power. So it's gambare, do your best, and shogunai is it can't be helped. So pretty much everything falls into one of those two categories, doesn't it? Sometimes both. Do your best and don't worry about it, sort of thing. Anyway, that's more than enough on that topic. More videos coming soon.